Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Sun Devils your first view and or listen of the day. Jake Hatch, Richie Bradshaw along for the ride here. All right, so Richie, I've got a grandfather who talked to me often about the old WAC. And what do you mean by the old WAC is we're talking the 1960s and 1970s, and ASU and Arizona were founding members alongside BYU of that conference. And they had some pretty epic battles. The Frank Kush era is obviously indelibly etched in the mind of a lot of ASU Sun Devils fans, and that comes from that era. But it's been nearly 50 years since these programs have been in the same conference. I'm actually wearing an old school BYU hoodie today, kind of throwing it back to 97 when these two programs, I think, last played in Tempe, if I'm not mistaken. And are you excited for this, to have them back in the same conference and hopefully reignite that rivalry that existed for quite a while there?
I certainly am, and I love that you brought up the rivalry going all the way back to the Western Athletic Conference. And it's one of the biggest pieces of ASU football history was getting to the Western Athletic Conference, and it was a big justification of, wow, they're taking a big step forward as a football program. They're joining not an elite, but an established football conference back in the 60s and 70s. And Frank Kush was someone that was getting ASU off to a really good start. They are considered, quote unquote, considered like the founders of the Sun Bowl, because ASU was so involved with going to that on a pretty consistent basis and everything like that. So making your way over to the Western Athletic Conference was huge for them to get to that point. It's so funny. I know this information, but I couldn't tell you many of the teams back then. And knowing that BYU was one of them, not a surprise at all. Like, logistically, it makes a lot of sense from when we used to have importance on regions for lining up different college programs and whatnot. God, I miss that. But that's not a surprise. And yeah, ASU has sparingly seen BYU over the last few years. They had that meeting in Tempe in 1997, and we played you guys in like 2021 in Provo.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, I mean, we've barely seen you guys. One of the things that I was really curious about during the offseason when ASU joined Big 12 was I was kind of looking around and I was like, who could your new rivals be? Like, obviously, you're joining with Arizona, Colorado, Utah. Those are established. Texas Tech, you've played them a handful of times. Maybe not. Other than that, I'm like, I don't know any programs that truly stand out to me. And BYU kind of came up and it was like, yeah, that kind of makes sense. And then you look into the history and you're like, that makes a lot of sense. Like, it's a generations old rivalry. Like you said, back to our grandparents. You said your grandpa taught it to you. My grandfather taught that stuff to me too. Yeah. Like, it's a generations old rivalry. So bringing it back to our generation and to I think there's 2 generations since me and you. Like, that's crazy to think about in itself, but neither here nor there. It's cool to bring that stuff back so that the younger generations, as they continue to come to this place, it's just fun. So igniting a new old rivalry, I think that's something that's really good for BYU and for ASU, and hopefully the rest of college football can appreciate it.
Well, and I think it is absolutely going to be reignited because I've got some family connections to the Valley. I've got in-laws and a brother and sister-in-law who married into the family who are from Arizona. And I can tell you, Richie, ASU is the hometown school, but a lot of them being members of the LDS faith, they're like, hey, I'm a little conflicted on all this. And I'm like, I get that, because there's a huge contingent of church membership down there that I'm sure they're thinking, okay, I've supported ASU and also BYU, but when they come head to head, who am I going to support? And I think that in and of itself is going to create a rivalry, because you're going to have these people who are from Arizona, who may be an active member of the LDS faith over here, but at the same time, like, hey, I've watched ASU and I've supported the Sun Devils. I'm looking forward to this. I think that the conflict in and of itself is going to create a new rivalry element to it all.
Very much so. And this game sold out yesterday. Or Tuesday. Yeah. This game sold out on Tuesday. And I remember seeing pictures all across my Twitter feed because I follow a bunch of ASU fans. What a coincidence. And I'm sure you do the same thing for BYU. And they had posted screenshots when I jumped in and they were like, I I logged in immediately. I am 62nd in line. I am this number in line. And it's like, holy cow. I can't remember the last time this happened. Game sells out. I believe this is a true sellout too. Like ASU's had 2 sellouts this year. It's like, that's 90% capacity. This is going to be a sellout. And I'll tell you, there's going to be a lot of blue in that crowd. Like, I would love for it to be like an 80-20 split. I won't say it's 50-50. I think ASU gets the edge, but it's going to be loud no matter whose offense is on the field. It's going to be a lot of blue and a lot of gold.
Well, and that's the thing about it is I love Kenny Dillingham sitting down and being like, all right, you're selling your tickets. Make sure they go to an ASU fan. And
exactly.
Here's the thing. I love that. I love the fact that he's trying to build this up a little bit, because I do think that BYU looks at ASU as a very natural rivalry that can be reignited and just evolve into something. Because obviously ASU and Arizona, the Territorial Cup is always going to be a thing. BYU and Utah, always going to be a thing. But being the western wing of the Big 12 as it stands right now, these 4 schools, along with Colorado, I hope all 5 of them play each other, if not annually, semi-annually. And
yes.
we're seeing them play often, because they need to have these regional rivalries built up and to have these fan bases get after one another, because that's the fun part about college football, is when you can have some rivalries that truly exist.
You need to start having the Holy War as your last game of the year.
I would hope so, yes.
That ASU has played the team down south every year, last game of the year for God knows how long, and it's something that all of our fans look forward to on both sides. It's a very politically driven rivalry. Mm-hmm. It is a very athletically driven rivalry. There's no love lost between these 2 teams. You will hear a lot of people say there are 2 seasons for ASU football. There's the first 11 games, and then there's the last game of the year. There are also some people who will consider the entirety of a successful season based off of 1 game, and it's the Duel in the Desert. And it's beautiful, and it's one of the things that we love so much. And coming to the Big 12, I didn't really see a lot of big rivalries like that. I'm not sure of the biggest, most dynamic rivalries in the Big 12 right now. And my apologies to the other 14 teams who may be listening to this, but it truly doesn't feel like there's that duel in the desert, that there's that holy war, or, I mean, going out of the boundaries. Like, it's not a battle in LA. It's not Iron Bowl. It's not anything like that. And it doesn't need to be like an S-tier rivalry, but like you said, that's one of the things that conferences will feed off of. ASU and Arizona are bringing it. I truly hope in all my heart that BYU and Utah becomes an annual game. And I would love for it to be last week of the year when you get those kind of rivalries. It's one of the reasons I was so excited, not as an ASU fan, just joining the Big 12 in general, was seeing some of the teams coming with us. And I was like, BYU-Utah.
Yeah.
That has got to be an annual game.
Well, and that's the thing about it is, I think all of us up here in Utah wanted to see that game at the final weekend of the year, because when they were in the WAC and the Mountain West together, that's what it traditionally was. It was the final weekend of the season. Now, I will just also say this. BYU just lost to Kansas. And I will tell you, having conversations with both, and both BYU and Utah both lost the week after they played that rivalry game. BYU wins that game 22-21. Let's just put it this way, Richie. It's not a coincidence both of those teams lost the following week. The emotional tie to it, the overall expenditure of the energy that goes into it, both physically and emotionally, it catches up with both of those teams. So, yeah, I'm not surprised in some respects that BYU and Utah both lost the following week. And that's why I'm with you. I am telling, if Brett Yormark ever sees this podcast, Brett, please put the Holy War on the final weekend of the season. It just needs to happen, because these two schools, much like Arizona State, you kind of gauge success of your season is on 1 game. I know that BYU's 9-1, and guess what? There's Cougar fans who are upset about them being 9-1, but a lot of them are saying at least it wasn't that 1 loss was not to Utah.
Yep, and it's beautiful. And I love that you mentioned the emotional high that you get off of those games. And I venture to think that for BYU and Utah, that rivalry game took a whole other level now that there are conference stakes involved. Because if BYU does not win that game against Utah, and if they slump against Kansas for the same reasons of the emotional high, If you're talking about 2 losses for BYU, this game against ASU is not just a, hey, your hopes are on the line. It is this is an elimination game from the Big 12. So that kind of stakes on the line. Ooh, yeah, sign me up for that every year, especially if, I won't say when, because Kyle Whittingham's probably gone, if Utah gets back to that point. And as long as BYU keeps doing what they're doing, because why wouldn't you with Kalani Sitake there?
Yeah.
I'm big on the alum stuff.
Yeah, no doubt
You'll
about
have
that.
those expectations every year, and it'll be great.